Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for a Minnesota Hockey Development webinar. My name is Jacob Mars. I chair the Hockey Director Committee for Minnesota Hockey, and we're excited to have you, and thanks for joining us. During this time when people are at home, we wanted to find resources for players, coaches, families, hockey directors to bring back to their associations this year as you begin planning for the 2021 season. We have a few others coming up that I recommend you take a look at. If you, on the website, there should be a link on the news feed for the coaching resources. We have some on body contact, on bench management, on coaching psychology, all really good resources that I urge you to take advantage of. Also, after the conclusion of this presentation, there'll be a question and answer period. And if you have any questions, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you should see a chat function, and you can send me a private message directly, and I'll facilitate that chat. Also, after this, if you have further questions or want additional resources available by Minnesota Hockey or USA Hockey, please reach out to your local district hockey director. Every district has a hockey director that is well educated on all the various aspects of the Minnesota development model and the American development model. And we urge you to take advantage of them and bring those resources to your home and to your association. Their contact information can be found on the website, and we'll go over that at the end. But for our for tonight's webinar, we're really excited to have Jason Aldrich. Is it Aldrich or Aldrich, Jason? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm on mute here. Oh, no, I'm not. Aldrich, sorry. Aldrich, I thought I was on mute there, guys.
We are excited to have Jason here to talk about incorporating effective Dryland training into your youth hockey program and your youth team. Jason is the strength and conditioning coach for University of Minnesota Duluth men's and women's hockey teams, and they have had a tremendous run. So congratulations to Jason and his staff on all the good work that they've been doing. So this should be a great presentation. And with that, Jason, I will turn it over to you.
Excuse me. Thank you, Jacob. I may have spoken to some of you before. I've done a few things with Minnesota hockey coaches with USA Hockey through Christian Kelling and Guy Goslin in the past. So some of you may be hearing a little bit of a repeat if you've seen me before. But first of all, I just want to say I hope everybody's staying healthy and surviving this weird situation that we're all in. It's not easy for anybody, I'm sure, but I hope everybody is staying healthy and safe. So part of what I'm going to do today is also going to talk about some at-home workouts that you can maybe incorporate now with your athletes that, just given the situation, not knowing how long this is going to go, summer leagues being canceled, this might be a good way and a forum for you guys to, still get your team together, maybe a Zoom workout, something like that, where you can use some of these body weight movements during this time. So part of what I'm going to talk about today is at-home COVID-19 workouts, if you want to call it, which kind of plays a good part of some of the body weight training that I want to talk to you guys about too. So first things first, just talking about implementing a training program with a youth team can be difficult just because, you're not always practicing every day. You don't have the facilities to do a weight training program. The times of practice might not be conducive to do stuff, keep kids there for an hour after practice. Mom and dad might want to get home, make dinner. They got homework. A lot of factors can be involved in that can prevent you from having a good strength training program with your teams. So the first and foremost and the easiest way to start implementing a program would be to start with a dynamic warm-up before every single practice and every single game. Build that routine. That's a great way to start building foundation and just building like a general good habits of warming up before practice. Plus you can kind of mix in a few athletic movements and maybe even a few strength training elements into that warm-up. You can range a warm-up anywhere from 15 minutes to 35, 40 minutes if you want to, just depending on how in-depth you want to get. But that's probably the best way to start on implementing a workout program, especially with younger kids. You're building that foundation, like I said, you're teaching them good habits, and you don't really need to reinvent the wheel. A dynamic warm-up it really hasn't changed that much in the last 10 years. That's the one part of strength conditioning that hasn't really changed. I mean, yeah, a few new movements have been incorporated, a few different new things, band work and all that have been incorporated, but for the most part, you can still get the same dynamic warm up in with no equipment whatsoever, just your body and a pair of shoes. You know, things like walking lunges, lateral lunges, inchworms, hip cradles, quad stretches, doing it while you're moving and not holding it statically. That's a dynamic warm up. So anything that you're just grabbing your foot, pulling it back, doing a quad stretch, take a step, grab the other one, doing a quad stretch, that's dynamic. So you're staying moving, you're not holding it for too long. You move that into some high knees, butt kicks, some skipping techniques, you know, basic, maybe some 1 foot starts for quick twitch reaction stuff. So there's a lot of ways that you can do a warm up and then your kids are going to be ready to go for practice. You don't need to waste time on the ice doing warm ups on the ice for practice. You know, you do a couple goalie drills for the goalies to see pucks and you get going. So it's a big time saver on the ice. You're not wasting any time for practice. Kids are already warmed up, ready to go. So I don't know how are we going to just save questions for the end, Jacob? Is that how it's going to go on here?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Unless anybody has any questions, feel free to send them to me and we can facilitate that as we go along as well.
Okay, I was going to say, because some of these, you know, different sections, you might have a question in that section. It's going to be kind of difficult to ask that with the Zoom call. But if you don't mind, if you have a question through any of these segments, just jot them down and we can ask them at the end, or like Jacob said, send them to him and we can kind of facilitate them as we go. But so dynamic warm up it's a very big part of what we do every day as far as strength conditioning. I use it as a big tool for injury prevention as well. So all of my mobility and injury reduction type of movement stuff, healthy hips, groins, shoulders, lower backs, that kind of stuff is all incorporated into my warm up. Now, depending on what age group you coach, you might not want to do so much of that injury prevention stuff. A squirt team doesn't really need to do much hip mobility at this point. It's not a bad idea to do some, but you don't need to spend, 20 minutes a day doing hip mobility when you'd rather just get them moving and get them going at that age. Now, as they get up into like Bantam age, where they're starting to hit growth spurts, they get those body aches and like growing pains, as they call it. That's basically your bone is growing faster than your joint, or your joint is growing faster than your bone. That's the age on which you want to start incorporating some of that hip, shoulder mobility, because those joints and bones are growing at such a rapid rate that they get painful and you can end up having some problems. But if you keep those joints moving and active, you can get ahead of those problems as they grow. So that's kind of a side piece of the warm up. But sticking with the implementing of a training program, the warm up's the best place to start. You can build off that very easily. It takes, like I said, 20 minutes to 40 minutes before practice. Everybody has that amount of time to fit that in. Younger kids might need more time to get dressed, but older kids, they shouldn't need much time to get dressed, 10 minutes tops. So there's plenty of time to incorporate that into your daily routine or pre-practice routine. So the next thing that I want to get into big right now is with coaches, I really stress not throwing weight on these kids before they are ready for it. It's a really big problem in today's day and age where, it's whether it's the kids or the parents, both are guilty of it. They want to fast track everything. They want everything to be fast. Like they want to start lifting weights. They want to get under bench presses. They want to start squatting big, heavy loads, all that. They think that's going to make them a better player, and it's not. At the age that these kids are at right now, it's not going to help them. It's going to hurt them actually in the long run. You start throwing weights on kids before they're ready, that's where injuries happen. Injuries to lower back pain, major joint injuries. And honestly, this might rub people the wrong way, but if a kid has a major joint injury or a lower back problem before they've graduated high school, that's not their fault. That's usually a coach's fault or a strength coach's fault or a gym coach or somebody who didn't teach them proper technique, gave them things to do with too much load that they weren't ready for. And it causes massive problems in the future with your joints and your back and just general development overall. There is a point in time where you do need to add weight for them for bone density development, but that doesn't need to happen before puberty. Honestly, like squirt and pee-wee age kids should not be lifting weights. Your body is a weight. Whether you want to believe it or not, your body is a weight. So if you can't manipulate your own body weight perfectly with proper motor recruitment patterns, all that, like proper movement patterns in general, if you can't manipulate your own body weight, there's no reason that you should be adding weight to your structure if you can't manipulate what you already have. So my biggest thing with this, and this is another easy way to implement a strength training program too, because you don't need any equipment to do so, is to start doing body weight strength development stuff. So body weight squats, single leg body weight squats, push-ups, dips, things like that. All those old school body weight methods are great for young kids, as long as they're learning how to do stuff properly. If they're learning how to do a body weight squat properly, where they're hip hinging, putting the weight on the back half of their foot, knees aren't coming over the toes, they're learning how to do that stuff at a young age. Structurally, they will go through the roof when they're able to start lifting weights and their body's ready for it and their age is ready for it and they're developed enough. But they've already got the movement pattern down pat so that you can throw a bar on them and now you don't have anything to worry about. So this body weight movement teaches them proper technique before you load them up. So they have these patterns down. So when you do load them up, you're not putting them at any risk. So those, I love the single leg stuff for lower body training. I do it with my athletes, both male and female. I can control their load by doing so. It's actually injury prevention stuff too, because it helps your joint stabilization. You're using stabilizing muscles that you don't really know you use. If you're on two legs or doing regular two-leg squats, you're not getting those stabilizers in. It helps balance, coordination, core strength. So the single leg is like, it's a one-stop shop. So, any type of split squat, walking lunge, static lunge, rear foot elevated split squats, single leg RDLs, single leg pistol squats. Those are all great movements that any age kid can do without hurting themselves if done properly. Next thing with body weight movements, don't forget about athletic movements. Athletic movements are body weight too, and they're the more important thing nowadays. The way the game has changed to the modern era, it's all about speed, explosive power. The days of the 1995 New Jersey Devils were big, bruising. Ken Danicos were patrolling the blue line at 6'4", 240 pounds. Those days are dead. If you can't move, you cannot play anymore. So that being said, an emphasis needs to really be put on like speed, agility, footwork, body control through speed and footwork, plyometrics, conditioning. Those are all great things that you can do and easy ways to implement into a training program for young kids or any age kids. You can never do too much footwork or speed training. No one's ever been accused of being too fast, too powerful, too explosive. It's never happened and never will happen. So put an emphasis on that. You can incorporate some of these things into a dynamic warm-up if you don't have time afterwards. Doing agility ladder, teaching them how to move their feet in controlled, proper manners, moving their feet with a purpose, not just flying their feet around and moving them really fast and going nowhere. Purposeful moving through agility ladders, different lateral shuffle movements, lateral plyos, straightforward plyos, jumping. But that being said too, there's technique involved. If you're going to teach a plyo, make sure you teach them how to land properly first. If everybody can jump, right? Everybody knows how to take off, but not everybody knows how to land properly where you're not going to put yourself at risk, pounding on your joints, rolling ankles, hurting your back, hurting your hip joints, hip sockets, all of that. So teaching them how to land soft and how to decelerate on their landing is very important. That's also body control. So going back to my theme of controlling your own body before you control more than your own body is very important for kids. Honestly, kids, even in high school, if a freshman in high school can't manipulate their own body, there's no reason for them to be on a weight training program. I honestly don't let my incoming freshmen do a lot of weight until I see them move properly. They have to do form checks and technique checks with me before they're allowed to advance on. So that's another thing that coaches should really be involved in and be very hands-on in teaching the proper technique of things. That's hard for me to show proper technique right now because of the situation on Zoom. I had a PowerPoint, but I can't get it to upload onto this right now. So that's dead, but I might be able to get up and show some movements at the end of just single leg stuff. But I'm putting together a YouTube channel as well for people to reference on proper technique on things. So once I get that going, I can email that to Jacob and he can share that with everybody.
Awesome. And for everybody, when Jason sends that email out, we will get an article on the Minnesota Hockey website with some links to the technique that he's talking about. So you can utilize that as a resource. So
yeah, I apologize for I had videos on this PowerPoint, but it's not letting me share it with anybody right now, so I don't know what's going on with it, but that'll be a good resource.
You want to try it one more time, Jason, now that I unshared my screen?
You know what? I even switched computers, so it's not even on this one. I switched to my iPad and it's on my laptop. So the YouTube channel will actually be a better resource for them down the road.
Perfect.
So it'll be, and then they can keep referencing it back. So it'll be better. And I might even be able to email that PowerPoint presentation with everybody with the YouTube channel as well. So
great.
We can get that. We can find ways to get you guys a little hands-on and teach you some things. But is it? There's no question so far. I kind of get going on rants and stuff, and I talk, and I'm long-winded. So Jacob, if you need to flag me down at any point in time, just throw me the cut.
We have a couple questions that came through, and we can go on those now, and then we can keep going at it.
Yeah, I mean, if they pertain to what we talked about, we may as well get them out of the way so that it's.
Yeah. So there was one that does pertain to what we're talking about. This is Steve from Edina. And how do you keep the 16 and 17-year-old kids from having hip labrum type issues at that age?
I pound on mobility, honestly, pound on hip mobility. What we're doing with these athletes is putting them in an unnatural position structurally with their hips. We're hinging their hips all the time and putting them into that forward tilt all the time. And it's not really natural. It's hard on your hips. It's really hard on your groins. And then we add to it by making these kids bike all the time. So we're putting them into that position even more, and that's binding their hips up even more. So, I mean, you don't want to run your kids every day doing conditioning. So you have to find a way to lower the impact. So you do want to bike them a lot, every once in a while. But I would say that biking these kids in short burst intervals, so 15, 20, 30-second intervals, hard sprints on a bike is a better format than having them sit on it for 25 minutes and go for a long ride. So that's one way. That's kind of a minuscule way to keep their hips from binding up. But the other way is to get those hips moving in a proper mobility pattern. So basically your hip is built like a ball and a socket. So when you see that, you get that ball moving around in here, a lot of people have it's buildup of scar tissue essentially from being in that position. So it's just grinding, and that's what's causing your hips to build, to block up and tighten up and have labrum issues. So you got to get that ball moving around. So doing simple things like a hip hydrant, where you're just on all fours, hands and knees, and you hydrant that hip up like you're a dog peeing on a fire hydrant. That's one thing. Try not to tilt let your spine twist at all. And then a simple basic staying in that same quadruped, hands and knees position on all fours. Draw a big circle with your kneecap forward, big circle with your kneecap backward. Do that 10 times each way with the hydrants. Those are two really good things. Spider-Man stretches, if anybody's familiar with the Spider-Man stretch, that's another great hip mobility routine. And then basically just some simple sideline like clamshells, external rotations, internal rotations with your hips, straight leg raises. Those are all great hip mobility drills to do. And then doing some simple, split squats where you take a big step, really sink your hips into it. Lateral squats where you sit your butt right down your heel. Those are all good hip mobility movements to do. So those are, I hammer on those even still in the college level, because they don't get any better. If you can, but that's the puberty thing too, where your joint or your bone is growing faster than the other. It happens all the time. 99% of human beings have that problem. So that's why. And then these kids are continuing to grind on their hips while they're playing hockey, going through these growth stages. And that's why they're having labrum problems sometimes. Sometimes they have what's called an egg-shaped ball, where the head of their femur isn't shaped like a ball, it's shaped like an egg. And so that egg digs in to the socket and causes labrum damage. So sometimes it's just a natural way that your body is built, and there's nothing you can do about it aside from going in and shaving your femur balls down, which is a very painful and long process to go through. And you don't want to do that as a 17-year-old.
No, definitely not.
So, but stay on the mobility. I mean, just hammer that mobility. My guys and girls get so sick of me and the mobility stuff that I do every day, because that's the first thing we do every single day is hip mobility, shoulder mobility. And it changes every day. I have a few different routines that I go through. So it's not like the same monotonous thing every single day, but at some point, they're like, can we just go and lift? Can we just get on the ice? It's like, no, we're going to do this, but we don't have hip and groin problems because of it. So you just have to stay on it and beat that dead horse, honestly, like, and supervise them. If you just throw the hip mobility drills on a board and say, do this, chances are they're not going to do it. It doesn't matter if they're a senior in high school or a sixth grader or a senior in college. Their chances are they're not going to do it unless you stand over them and hover and breathe down their neck and force them to do it, and force them to do it properly and slow and not just rip through it. So you have to, as a coach, you have to take the responsibility on you to really supervise these kids during these mobility drills. Otherwise, they're just going to blow through it and they're going to half-ass it and they're not going to take it seriously. They don't know yet the importance of it. And unfortunately, most kids are stubborn and don't know the importance of it until they have a problem or until they get old like us and then they start falling apart. So teach them now and hammer it. Don't let them slide on it. It's more important than lifting weights. Honestly, that joint health and joint stability, mobility is way more important than lifting weights. You're not going to have a long career if you have joint problems. That's all there is to it. You're going to end up sitting in the press box your whole career. And like I tell our guys, you being in the press box does me no good, does you no good, does the coaching staff no good, and does our program no good. So keep that in mind but take the responsibility on yourself to really, really hammer that mobility in, especially on those Bantam age kids and up. It's really beneficial for them in the future and right now. I mean, their lateral mobility on skates, like they'll be able to close the gap as a defenseman laterally because they'll be able to get their hips around quicker because they're more mobile. So is that pretty clear on that question? I'll bet YouTube channel will clear up some of that mobility stuff too.
Absolutely.
So and then don't forget about conditioning. Conditioning is a forgotten thing with young kids, and young kids still need conditioning. Everybody thinks that because they're, young, they have all this energy, they got this motor, and some kids do, some kids don't get tired, but get their heart rate up. Don't be afraid to do some interval sprinting with them every once in a while. Don't forget about that, because conditioning is something that slides on a lot of young kids. They want to get in there. They want to have, they want to push heavy weights around. They want to get faster. They want to be able to jump higher, but then all of a sudden they go back and start playing a game and they're gassed after 15 seconds of their first shift because they forgot to condition. So make sure conditioning is taken care of. And you can implement that on ice, off ice, anywhere. That's the beauty of conditioning. You can control that anywhere you are. So, and like another thing, no one's ever been too fast. No one's ever been in too good a shape either. So keep that in mind too, especially with all like the high school age kids, that they start to slack on it. So I don't think you really need to put squirts on a line and have them run 300-yard shuttles or do Herbies or anything like that, unless they really screwed up. But the like Pee Wee Bantam high school age kids, conditioning can really benefit them.
Jason, we talk about conditioning and making sure that we're keeping players' heart rates up and all of that. But I think oftentimes the misconception in hockey is that conditioning is the old school Herbies. It's, just get on the line and skate. But, we know that you can condition in a lot of other ways instead of just line skating. Do you have some ideas to on ice and off ice conditioning options that coaches from the young ages through, I see we have high school coaches on here, could utilize?
Yep. So I have a few different ones on and off ice. The biggest thing for on ice that you really need to, and it's kind of sad that we have to do this nowadays, but is establishing the difference between conditioning and punishing. Punishing is when you go out there and skate the kids line to line and you don't have a watch or there's no method to your madness. You're just blowing a whistle because you want to punish them. So, but conditioning needs to be controlled. And your athletes have to know that, like, it's not a punishment, like just because their mindset it goes out the window. If they know they're being punished for something and not being conditioned for it, they're going to quit on you before you even start. So I always bring a stopwatch with me. And that's my indicator of letting everyone know that this is conditioning. Like, we're running a stopwatch. I'm timing your reps. I'm timing how fast you do a rep in so that I can time your rest. And I use ratios a lot. So I use either a 2-to-1 rest or work to rest ratio, or rest to work ratio, or a 3-to-1 rest to work ratio. So like a 3-to-1 would be a 15-second on interval, 15-second sprint with a 45-second rest. That's a 3-to-1. 2-to-1 would be a 15-second sprint with a 30-second rest. So run a watch. You have them do, a full, like a circle, like go touch the dot, go down and back, whatever you may be doing for conditioning that day, time it. And then whether you want to do a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1, double that or triple that time and have them rest and look at your watch so that they know that you're conditioning. That's that's first step. And that's something that you should do on ice or off ice, is make sure that you have a work to rest ratio and that you stick to it. Otherwise it becomes punishment and you're not doing any good. You're not conditioning at that point. You need to give kids time to recover before you start the next one. That's what conditioning is. So any type of
psychologically for players, it's important to separate what a punishment is and what conditioning is. Because I've learned with my teams that if you want to use skating drills for conditioning, you probably shouldn't use those for punishment, because psychologically they'll always relate that skating as being a punishment. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And like stops and starts don't always have to be part of conditioning either. Stops and starts can be part of punishment all you want, but you don't necessarily have to stop them all the time. You could have them do tight turns as long as they're moving and in a controlled environment. They're still working. So, you don't necessarily have to grind them into the ground with stops and starts. But I like, Jacob, that's a very good point, is don't use the same bag skating skating drills that you would use to punish as you would to do conditioning. So if Herbie's your go-to punishment, don't condition them like that. Use a different, whatever method you might want to do. Maybe you do I like to do the one where I pull the nets to like the hash marks, and I have them start on a goal line and they go around the net to the goal line on the opposite side of the rink and then back. And then the next group goes and then back. And then it kind of works its own ratio out. So we run 3 groups like that, and then it's a 3-to-1 ratio. So you don't really need a watch. That's another way to do it. But just mix up different things. Like, if you do sidewalls for a punishment, don't do sidewalls for conditioning because they get confused. Off ice, I do a lot of like shuttle runs. So, 25-yard increment, 300-yard shuttle, or a 50-yard increment, 300-yard shuttle, a 150 shuttle. I do a lot of that stuff for my conditioning, and then just basic interval sprints. So a 100-yard sprint, we time it, rest, double rest, triple rest, whatever. 100-yard sprint again. We'll do like 8 to 10 reps of those, or we'll bump it up to 200 yards, 300 yards, and that's just dead sprinting. So anything interval related on or off the ice is going to help your conditioning for hockey players. Hockey's a weird sport because it's aerobic and anaerobic at the same time, but it's more anaerobic than aerobic. You do need to you do have to recover after a 45-second shift quickly so you can go do it again a minute and a half later. But you also have to be able to sustain that for 60 minutes. So one of the skates I like to do is I call it the 7-minute skate. And I honestly I pull the nets to the hash marks and I have the whole group just skating around. And I start for the first 4 minutes, I have them skate and I have them go hard between the blue lines. So they sprint between the blue lines and then keep skating. They don't coast, but they're not sprinting on the other ones. And then at the 4-minute mark, I blow the whistle, and then it's hard from dot to dot on the edges. And then you're just kind of coasting the corners, sprinting the dots. We do that for 3 minutes solid. And that's a 7-minute skate. That's kind of our aerobic capacity drill that we do.
And those are college players, and they're gassed after that.
That's how we start. That's how I start my conditioning. So I start with that, and then I put them on the line, and we do like actual interval sprinting, stops and starts conditioning as well. So that kind of starts that's my way of doing an aerobic capacity within an anaerobic interval workout. I start with that was one of the questions we had through the chat here was, how important is it to mix anaerobic and aerobic training? Can you discuss the difference and explain what those two things are, please? Yeah. So basically anaerobic training is your fast twitch, your sprint twitch. So anaerobic is like your quick burst. So we're going to be under a minute. We call it. I mean, some would argue that, but anything under a minute of hard, intense, maximum effort, that's anaerobic. Aerobic is running a marathon, going for a 30-minute bike ride, something that your heart rate's staying kind of steady. It's elevated, but it's steady. It's not going up and down, up and down. Anaerobic is where your heart rate's going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. So the importance of aerobic and hockey players, there is an importance to it. Like I said, you have to be able to sustain anaerobic capacity for 60 minutes. So that's where the aerobic comes into play. I don't like to do too much aerobic stuff right away. Like once a week, we do something where it's a long bike ride. I call them energy rides, where we focus on wattage, where it's like a 25-minute watt ride, where your watts are constantly increasing for certain, like, but it's still an interval. So that's kind of my way of doing an interval. Like we'll go, 250 watts for 3 minutes, 300 watts for 3 minutes, come down to 150 watts for a minute while you recover, back up to 350 watts for 3 minutes. And we do that for 25 minutes. So that's my aerobic capacity, but it's still anaerobic element to it. But just having an intense practice too can help your aerobic capacity. If you have a 60-minute practice and these kids are constantly going, and it's a hard, good paced practice, that's your aerobic capacity with your anaerobic capacity all built into one. So you don't need to spend too much time on your aerobic. Your interval training will help you. You just have to make sure that you're constantly progressing your reps, your intensity, your time of the intervals, and progress that a lot. So start with 15, move up to 20, move up to 30. You can even get up to like a minute intervals if you want to. I do some of those. I do some 2-minute interval stuff, but that's kind of how you build that. And that'll eventually, you'll develop aerobic capacity by doing interval training with anaerobic capacity training.
Awesome. And with that, where would you say that those work to rest ratios are coming into play? Is it just in the on ice, or is it just in the on ice skating and conditioning portion, or do you see work to rest in other areas of off ice training?
I use some ratio stuff too. When we're doing like my max strength phase, I call it. I make sure they ratio it off, because max strength, you're lifting as heavy as you possibly can sometimes. And so you want them to have ample rest in between so that they're fresh right away, so they can actually maximize their lift effort. So that's really the only time I use it. And then sometimes if I need to do like a hypertrophy phase where we want to build muscle and put muscle mass on, like a freshman that comes in that's 150 pounds that just needs survival muscle, I'll ratio that, and that's a shorter ratio. That's almost like a 1-to-1.
Okay.
We want to keep them time under hypertrophies, time under tension, and less recovery time. So you want to keep them under tension for 45 seconds to a minute, let them recover for a minute, get them right back under the bar. So those are the only times I really use ratios within the strength conditioning element. But with speed, you should ratio some speed stuff too. Speed is meant to be speed, not conditioning. So if you're doing speed work, like 10-yard one-step quickness drills, make sure that you're giving them ample recovery time. That should almost be more like a 4-to-1 ratio, just so they're fully recovered and fresh so they can twitch again hard. You're trying to develop top speed, not develop conditioning and heart rate. So make sure that's one speed thing that I forgot to mention, is make sure they're fully recovered when you're doing speed training. Did that answer it?
Well, we had another, absolutely. And at what age would you recommend this? The question is, isn't it true that younger kids have one speed that's not really developed enough to work anaerobically compared to those older kids that are starting to hit puberty?
Yeah. Younger kids, like prepubescent kids, they don't really have fast twitch fibers, so to speak. They have them, but like they're not fast twitch fibers, right? Like that's why, like when you say, it's funny you say one speed, because in my mind I picture a young kid on a line at like field day, and you say go, and they all take off 100 miles an hour, whether they're running the mile run or they're just doing like a 100-yard sprint. They take off 100 miles an hour off the line every single time, and then they're gassed. But they haven't really developed all those muscle fibers yet, like the fast twitch fibers and the anaerobic capacity fibers. So they don't need much, like as far as conditioning, I guess, so to speak, just because they're not ready for it yet. They need more of that like body control type stuff, so that when they run, they're not running all over, their arms aren't going all over the place, and their head's not shaking all over the place. They just need control. Like you got to rein those young kids in. So they don't, like I said, they haven't developed enough fibers to really, like, you're not going to develop speed on these kids. You're not going to develop strength on these kids because they don't have the muscle fiber development yet, but you can develop mechanics. biomechanics. That's the biggest thing with kids like before puberty, is developing mechanics.
Do you have, and on the mechanics side, when we send out information after this, can you include some information on how to build the mechanics in younger players?
Yep.
And do you have any high intensity interval training that you recommend on ice and off ice? Obviously, it's going to be different for a squirt compared to a high school kid, but do you have any that you enjoy using?
I use, for all my hit stuff, I use the assault bike for. I do a lot of assault bike high intensity training just because it's an all-in-one and it's kind of conditioning. I use hit for more for my conditioning stuff than I do for like strength training elements. I will use some like battle rope hit workouts, but I don't like doing like high intensity interval stuff with like plyometrics, just because there's so much central nervous system research that's done like by overloading in plyos and like those high CNS movements. You shouldn't really do like a high intensity interval workout. It should be more like a controlled rep workout. So I don't use a lot of hit within my strength element stuff. I use it more in my conditioning stuff.
Absolutely. We have another question from Jeff. Two questions, and they're both awesome. First is, what's the best balance between aerobic, strength training, and hockey-specific exercises? And that loops into another one of his questions, which is, what do you recommend during the summer in terms of times per week for Drylands in addition to other sports and summer hockey? And I know you and I had a good conversation about student athletes being multi-sport athletes versus one sport.
So let's, can you run that first one by me one more time? The first question?
I'll read you the question. What do you recommend during the summer in terms of times per week to do Dryland in addition to other sports and summer hockey? Also, what is the best balance between aerobic, strength training, and hockey-specific exercises? And I think that the balance question, it'd be good to hear for off-season and in-season.
Okay, sorry, I'm just writing down a few notes on those questions. So the summer times per week is really age dependent, honestly. So we'll start with younger kids. Let's say, I would say, like, if you're going to get your younger kids together twice a week, that's plenty. Like, we're talking squirt peewees here. Twice a week is plenty for strength training. I encourage kids to play other sports in the summer, especially at younger ages. And that's the best way to develop your athleticism. You play other sports, lacrosse, soccer, you're learning, you get hand-eye coordination, foot-eye coordination, learning how to just like run properly, and other things like baseball. It's so important for kids to not be one-dimensional too young. I understand that eventually you have to make a decision on what you want to do, but being one-dimensional is not good for a kid's athletic development too early. So if a kid's playing lacrosse or baseball or soccer or football in the summertime, you especially don't go over twice a week. You're just going to burn these kids out, and they don't need to be burned out that fast. They're getting enough done, especially on their other sport. That's going to translate to hockey. Honestly, it's going to translate to hockey. If you play lacrosse, that's going to translate. You play baseball, it's going to translate. Something from every sport will translate back into hockey, and something from hockey will translate back into other sports. So I really encourage people to play other sports in the summer, especially before high school. It's the best way to develop athleticism naturally, honestly. And then
Awesome.
So that's summertime. Like, as you get older, like once they get into high school and they have to start like really, okay, you're a sophomore in high school. You've had a few junior teams sniffing around you. You got maybe a few college teams sniffing around you, and you have to make a decision if you're going to play baseball in the summer, if you're going to play summer baseball or not. That's about the time when you should start ramping up your off-ice training to about 4 or 5 times a week. And I like the 4 times a week to start with that middle day, like that 5th day being, I break it up where we go 2, break day 2. So Monday, Tuesday hard, Wednesday's kind of our long conditioning day where we don't lift. We just come in and do injury prevention. And then we have a aerobic day. and then Thursday, Friday, hard. So that's kind of like my high school age model and up, like sophomore in high school and up. Once they are able to drive themselves to the gym and they're playing hockey and they're high level, that's when they should start going to 4 days a week minimum. And then the balance between strength training and hockey specific, like when you say hockey specific, I think of hockey specific in a very different manner than a lot of people do. And this is the strength coach coming out in me. Yeah, I did play hockey, but to me, hockey specific or even sports specific in general is what you're doing at practice. So like hockey specific stuff to me is stick handling, shooting, skating, that kind of stuff. Saying no different than football. Football would be catching, throwing, tackling. That's football specific things. So I might be misinterpreting what you mean by hockey specific training, just because
I think you got that right.
Okay. So, and then with strength training, there's no such thing as a sport specific movement in a gym unless you're throwing a ball or shooting a puck or something like that, doing an actual sports skill. That's sport specific training. Nobody invented weight training. It's all the same movements. We just do it in a different format and everybody's changes stuff but it all comes back to the same type of stuff eventually, whether you're using single leg. I got a reputation when I was coming up in strength conditioning as being a hockey specific guy because I did single leg movements, honestly. And I called one of my single leg movements a skater squat. It was a one leg RDL. I called it a skater squat. And it got called a hockey specific movement. And I drove me nuts, drove me crazy. It's athlete specific. You do certain movements based on what the athlete needs. So that's a rant, sorry, but the balance between strength training and hockey specific. So like in season, when you're practicing, if you're practicing twice a week, do 2 times a week of strength training as well. Just depending on what your schedule is on the weekends though. If you have a tournament where you have to play 5 games, maybe you don't do the strength stuff on Thursdays after Thursday's practice. If you have to play 2 games Friday, 2 games Saturday, and possibly 2 on Sunday, you might want to take that day off. But if you have a weekend where you only have 1 game or something, then yeah, have at her on Thursday. It's not going to kill them. They'll be ready to go by Saturday. But you kind of have to manage your load based on your game schedule at any age, really, because kids will get tired. They'll get sore. They'll burn out, and you want them fresh. So I would say, like, if you're practicing every day, if you have the ability to practice every day, then you only need like 2 or 3 strength days a week. And only 2 of them really need to be lifting or like actual strength training days. The other day should be an athletic day where you're just doing footwork, plyos, speed stuff, body control, athletic movements. So those are my recommendations on balance. If you're practicing every day, if you're only going twice a week, then you probably should do something on both of those days as far as strength training is going. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a lift every day or a body weight lift every day. Like you could do, if you practice Tuesday and Thursday, Tuesday after practice, you could do your body weight strength training day and just hit every body part on that one day. Just one time through, do a circuit, whatever you may be. And then Thursdays are your athlete day where you just focus on your footwork and your plyos and your explosiveness and your fast twitch. That way you're not overloading them. Those are good ways to kind of balance it out. But if you're not skating every day and you only get your hands on them so many times a week, you want to maximize that time. So finding like you should do something like a warm up before practice, and then 20 minutes after practice of whether it be agility or strength element.
And speaking of after practice, you were touching on earlier on a pre-activity warm-up, and we've talked about that being a dynamic warm-up. But one of the questions that came through was, how about after practice, a cool down, even for those, your squirts through high school, and that being a static stretch over a dynamic stretch. And you can tell me if I'm wrong on that assumption.
No, you're bang on. Actually, this line's kind of right up with my next topic, because I trying to go down the list of like, pre-practice warm up and then some strength training elements. And then I was going to go to recovery. So a post-practice cool down I do them every day. I think they're a great way. It's recovery work. Your body needs to recover, but you also need to kind of train your body to start recovering. Because if you just stop, your body's not going to just stop, right? Your body's going to keep going. So you need to find a way to cool it down. Otherwise, you're just going to your muscles are going to go into like shock almost. It's like jumping into cold water after being in a sauna. It's just, you don't want to do that. I do it all the time in the summer, but you don't want to do that to your muscles after, like if you're 60 minutes of competition and then you just stop. You should do something. And static stretching is something that should be done post game, post practice, but you should cool them down first. So get their heart rate to come down without, not by just sitting there, but like get it to come down. You get it to come down. So whether that be doing I call it a dynamic in reverse. If you don't have bikes to cool them down at a low resistance, throw that dynamic in reverse where you start out with, some high knees, and then you go to butt kicks, then you do some side shuffles with arm swings, and you just tell them to start slow, and you just slow it down as you go. So you can still do those same dynamic like movements, the high knees and stuff like that at the end. Just have them do it in a slower format. So don't have them go all out, slow down and get slower as you go, and then static stretch them. And don't hold for more than 15 seconds on that static stretch post practice, post game. If you have the ability to bike them, get them on bikes at a super low resistance, less than 85 RPMs, and just knock that resistance down every 2 minutes until you hit 10 minutes and get off and static stretch. But not everybody has that ability. So the reverse dynamic, slowed down reverse dynamic warm up is another great way to cool them down, get their heart rate lowered before you stretch them out.
For sure. I think the last thing that I have for you, unless there's any more questions from the floor, would be if you could talk about sleep, rest, recovery, and the importance of hydration. Because I think that, especially in the youth hockey world, the hockey director committee did some research this year and found that some teams were on the ice 20 days in a row. And that's a lot of hockey for a youth team. So how can we, or what's the importance of sleep, rest, and recovery and hydration as you take a drink of your water? That's awesome timing. How do you best utilize that and put it into your youth program?
So I'm a big hydration guy. I'm going to start there because I think you can get ahead of a lot of soreness and a lot of issues, fatigue, everything, just by being hydrated. So many athletes, especially young athletes, are dehydrated prior to competition, and it's just not acceptable. And then you'll see kids like trying to cram like 6 bottles of water and a Gatorade, 20 minutes before warm-ups because they feel like they're dehydrated. Hydration starts days before competition, days, not the day of. It starts days. Like I tell our guys and girls, hydration for Friday starts on Monday. It technically should start on Sunday, but it starts on Monday, really. And all week you got to take care of that hydration. So I compare being dehydrated. It's like running your car without oil. You wouldn't do it. So you shouldn't do it to your body either, because the same breakdowns will happen. You can tear muscles really easily. You can blow joints up very easily because you are dehydrated. Mental focus goes right out the window if you're dehydrated. Fatigue factors right out the window. Cramping. So many different things can be solved just by drinking water. And hydration isn't Gatorade. Gatorade is overused in massive amounts, especially in younger athletes, because it's so loaded with sugar. There's nothing better for hydration than water. You do sometimes, if post game, you need to get those electrolytes back into you. Yeah, that's a good time for a Gatorade. But before, water. There's nothing better than water. So that's my hydration kick, especially with teams that are playing 2 games in a day. My goodness, you have to be able to get those nutrients back in them before you start the next one up. Water and food. Food is fuel. You don't run your car without gas. You don't run your body without water. It's the same thing. The food is the gas, the water is the oil. So you need both of those 2 things in order to survive and to stay in it. Especially when you're playing multiple games in a day or in a weekend. Those are big time things. And then post game, I have a post game hydration protocol where they weigh in pre-game, weigh out post game, and then whatever weight they lost, that's how much water they have to drink. So if you lose 3 pounds in a game, it's 3 times 16 ounces. That's what you got to drink. So it's 16 ounces per pound of body weight lost. That's what they got to drink. That's my post game recovery, and that's just to get started. Then you have to keep drinking. Now you got to hydrate. That's just to get you back to square one. Now you got to hydrate. So I think keeping that in mind, post game, get the water, Gatorade in them right away, and then just get them back to 0, and then keep hydrating them. If your son or daughter has to get up 6 times in the middle of the night to take a pee, great. that contradicts the sleep thing that I'm about to talk about. But so sleep is the other thing. Like, you recover while you sleep. If you don't get at least 8 hours of sleep, you're not going to be prepared for the next day. Your focus is going to be off. Your muscles aren't going to fire the way you want them to. Your whole body is just going to be shut down. So sleep patterns too are very important. Healthy sleep and healthy sleep patterns. Healthy sleep is very misunderstood. So your kids should be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep every single night without question. Don't use that thing like, oh, they're getting too much sleep. There's no such thing. You can't get too much sleep. But you can't make up sleep. So if you don't get 8 hours of sleep, you can't go to bed, 2 hours earlier the next day and think that you're going to make that sleep up, or take a nap because you're going to make that sleep up. No, naps just hurt your sleep patterns. But you should go to, sleep should be consistent. By that, I mean, it should be go to bed at the same time every night, wake up at the same time every night, every morning. That's consistent sleep. Healthy sleep is staying asleep all night long without much activity. Maybe you have to get up and go to the bathroom. That's one thing, but you want to keep your sleep patterns very consistent. Otherwise, you're going to lose sleep. And once you lose sleep, you don't get it back. You can't make up for that lost sleep. So keeping your sleep consistent helps you recover, helps your metabolism. I mean, it's everything all in one. And if you don't get it, man, mentally, you're not going to be able to lock yourself in mentally, physically, if you don't get those at least 8 hours of sleep every single night.
Awesome.
And then sometimes I'll say this, because I hear this one a lot, is that athletes will say, if they play a game at 7 o'clock at night and they get home at 10:30 or 11, they have a hard time winding down and they can't fall asleep after competition. Very common thing. I don't have a recommendation for that. Honestly, there isn't really a good recommendation for that problem. Some people say it's swear by melatonin. Some people don't. I just think they have to find a way to mentally just calm down and reset and not think about it. Turn their brain off. If they can turn their brain off, their body will follow. Other than that, I mean, if you want to chemically induce them into sleep, that's your decision. I don't like that kind of stuff. I'm not a big melatonin fan. I like healthy, natural sleep, but I get sometimes there's certain situations, you're on a bus, you need to get some sleep. You can't, just played a game, you got another one the next day and you can't turn everything off. You have to use melatonin or whatever it may be to get down. That's one thing, but try to not use it consistently. It shouldn't be a consistent aid in sleep. It should just be like once in a while if you really need it.
Awesome.
And that's,
well, Jason, is there anything else that you have for us? And
I don't. I talked about weight training a little bit. I didn't talk a lot about it, but I think I wanted to spend more time on the body weight and the athletic movements and manipulating your own body more, and not confuse people by talking a lot about weight training. But if anybody has any questions about weight training, if you have a high school athlete that you're concerned about or a high school team that you want, maybe we could open up this time now if we have time to do so. I kind of went overboard, I think, but.
No, that's fine. And then when you get your YouTube channel, if you want to send all that information over to me, I'll make sure we pump that out on the Minnesota Hockey page and with our resources here, because that was fantastic.
I will do. The one thing I have to check on is I have to make sure a lot of my videos I'm wearing Bulldog hockey stuff in, and I don't know what the rules are for that. So especially I send the YouTube videos to my YouTube channels in my athletes' hands all the time, but that's different. They're allowed to see that, and it's just my athletes that see it. So I have to check and make sure I'm not allowed to, if I'm allowed to fly the Bulldog flag on these videos or not. I might have to reshoot a few if I'm not allowed.
No, totally. Well, I think we've gotten through all the questions that were sent in. If you have any more questions, feel free you can email those to me and I can get you in touch with Jason. And in the meantime, also, if you have any more questions, you can contact your district hockey director. On the Minnesota Hockey homepage, you'll see in the news feed, off-season development for coaches. You can click that, and that'll take you to the article with our upcoming webinar series. The next one is body contact skill progressions. That's going to be Wes Bolin, who's the ADM coordinator for Minnesota Hockey. And then using psychology to guide coaching and program design from Heather Mannix. But if you have those questions, you can just click on the district HDC link, and that will take you to the page of all of the district hockey directors who I strongly recommend you reach out to and utilize as a resource. With that being said, Jason, thank you very much for hopping on the call and answering all these questions. I think we got some unbelievable information and resources out of it.
Well, thank you, Jacob, for having me, and thank you all for listening. I'm sorry I got long-winded. I tend to do that, but thank you. I hope you guys gained something out of this. And if you have any questions, Jacob can show you how to get a hold of me, and I can try to answer them as best as I can. But thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the night.